What a great opportunity we have this morning to hear from the Next High School Planning Committee. And I'd like to introduce them to you today. And I think we'll have a great opportunity to understand a little bit more about the high school initiative, a little bit more about Next, a little bit more about Next as the economic development platform for the Chamber, and why those things are so important to our small business community. First up on our panel on my far left is Zach Eikenberry with FCD Incorporated. Next to him on my left is Anna Locke with AT Locke. To my far right is John Moore, who is the Vice President of the Chamber of Commerce and very involved in Next. As a matter of fact, I think that's your primary role now, isn't it, John?
It's becoming that.
That's becoming that, yes. And of course, our moderator, Michael Bolick with Sela Technologies. And Michael has done an amazing job with his company, and he's done an amazing job as being part of the Next organization, really from its inception. And so Michael's going to be moderating our panel today. At the end of the panel discussion, we'll have about 15 minutes for question and answer from the audience, so be thinking about questions you may have. I will ask you when we get to the question and answer session, if you have a question, address your question to one panel member, not the panel as a whole. That way we can get through more than one or two questions during that 15-minute period. So it's my pleasure to turn the podium over to Michael Bolick. Michael.
Good morning. I could tell you that quite a long time ago, I first heard some folks in the community beginning to talk about Next High School, and I thought that was just somebody was maybe stayed up a little too late, weren't thinking straight. I thought, okay, well, I know about Next, but how does that translate to Next High School? And then I heard this really passionate young person come into the community and start to explain, this isn't something completely unheard of in the world. This is something that has been proven in other places, and there's no reason that Greenville can't even be better in those other places. So I'm just thrilled to have the opportunity to even be near these folks, because I think it truly is the future. The folks in our schools will have opportunities that, frankly, wouldn't have been there if the folks that are on this panel hadn't stepped up and started to push. But as I understand it, these folks need your help and our help, and that's really what this morning's all about. So I'm going to start off, I guess, really turning to Zach and just saying, the vision that you brought to the community and the thought of rallying these folks was, it had to have been an innovative concept, at least in this community. And I'd love to hear, what were you thinking when you came in and you said, hey, we can do this here?
Yes. So to answer your question, Michael, I'm a small business owner myself, right? Over the years, I've migrated my company into that space that's known as entrepreneurial, where you're working in new markets, defining new markets, trying to embrace emerging markets. And I'll tell you a story. Because a lot of folks say I'm entrepreneurial, I'm not entrepreneurial, and how do you even decide that? A few years ago when I was here in town, I was talking to a gentleman who's a mentor of mine, and he's about double my age and has been there, done that, and all things. And sitting with him, I said, well, I was trying to prove a point. As a small business owner. I said, Ed, you might be an entrepreneur if you can't sleep at all on Thursday because payroll's due on Friday. And he goes, no. You sleep like a baby on Thursday. You don't sleep at all on Sunday nights because they're about ready to cash those checks. And so being a small business owner and dealing with those challenges on a day-to-day basis, I think one of the things that we certainly can talk about on this forum and on this panel is what does small business have to do with Next High School, an education endeavor. When you even pull back the curtains, you'll see that most of our supporters and most of the folks that are behind Next High School thus far have been in the small business community. But as someone that came here, I came down on my way to Charleston a little over 5 years ago, fell in love with Greenville and said, this is a place I want to live and bring my company. John Moore was one of the first folks that we talked to in that endeavor, and as time went on, I'll give you the direct story for how we got to here. I was at an Accelerate meeting where they were talking about economic development, economic prosperity on a wide scale. And I was very surprised to hear, just as a outside observer, the leadership in Greenville talking about moving from a hunting model to a farming model. That is moving from recruiting other companies out of other people's ponds and getting them to move here, instead making a strategic bet that the best companies, ideas, people, and resources in our backyard, and economic prosperity is a matter of stewardship. And when you decide that as a community, education becomes your primary vehicle for economic prosperity on a wide scale. So it was from that a few of us got together and said, well, how can we get involved? The next CEOs, we're all located at this point in time, not all the companies, John Moore will tell you more about that, in the next building. We started having some vision groups, and I think Michael Bullock even sent some folks our way when we were sitting around talking about how do we get involved in education. And over the years, Next High School is what has evolved out of that, starting with a blank piece of paper saying, if we started a school today, what would it look like? So,
Thank you. Well, a lot of folks around the community have become very excited. I know that Anna not only got excited, she decided she'd actually join the board and help pull on the rope. Before we get to John and how this ties into the overall vision of Next, maybe Anna, could you give us a sense for what inspired you in the vision? I mean, obviously you're committing your time and talent and treasures to the support of the process, but what specifically spoke to you, maybe as a business person first, and then maybe just relevant to the community, and how this can affect the children that could potentially come through the program?
I'd love to talk about it. And I'm speaking a little bit lower in tone than those who are used to hearing me speak, so wave at me if you can't hear what I'm saying. It was really neat to meet Zach, kind of what he just said in the stewardship fashion. I was introduced via one of my staff members. We worked out a coffee meeting. I had no idea what I was walking into. That turned into just a phenomenal presentation about the concept of how we begin to map all of the curriculum that we want a child to learn, an adolescent to learn, and map it to how it's being used in business today. And I myself am a trained accountant. I took double entry accounting through the vocational school at my high school. That was actually outside of the math and the science and the what I would call college prep. It was an elective course for me. I loved it. I loved that it balanced. I loved that there was an answer. And so as I sat there and listened, this concept was so consistent with myself. I probably chose accounting because I knew it related to all industry, and I didn't have to make up my mind so quickly. It gave me options. And accounting and finance is just one piece of the puzzle when you start thinking about supply chain, when you think the science behind the development of a concept, the design that goes in, regardless of whether it's creative. Sometimes we think the word design is reserved for pictures and paintings, and really that word design is all throughout the project-based learning model that Zach has, and I point to Zach all the time whenever anything Next High School comes up, because he has the passion for this, the creativity, and the willingness to ask questions, and basically that why not? Because it has the concept does exist in other places. We fully believe that the Greenville and the upstate, and quite frankly the state of South Carolina, can bring this to the table and bring value all across the board.
Maybe just as a follow-up, can you speak, maybe Zach, and if you could speak to it, then maybe Zach, you can follow on. The idea here is bigger than Greenville, as I understand it, correct? So maybe you could speak to that as an aspirational goal.
You mind if I start and you can finish? There's a institution in Fresno, California called CART, the Center for Advanced Research and Technology, and our planning committee had an opportunity to take a vision tour last spring, and we're getting ready to go out there again to meet with students, faculty, administration, to learn about a school that's been up and running for 10 to 15 years now. It is a half-day program that feeds from 16 different high schools. I knew that was too low of a number. Where the students spend half of their day in the traditional classroom setting and half of their day in a project-based learning setting. Had the opportunity to be led on tours and listen to presentations by the high school students. And personally, for me, one of the students that led the tour did not realize what she was teaching me in simply her language that she was using, in which she voiced very clearly that she preferred coming to the project-based learning school and had improved her grades because she actually felt like she was learning something versus being taught something. And she was very matter-of-fact and just demonstrating, quite frankly, that she was being exposed to the same information, yet she preferred the methodology in the project-based learning environment over the lecture, the traditional classroom. So that was so neat for me as we were beginning our path towards writing the curriculum, putting the plans together, thinking about the types of projects that we can work on, just all the different diversity in labs, and to see some young girls in lab coats as they made presentations for their research project for prescription medicines, and eye to the consumer as well as the production side. Just that blending together is what I'm so passionate about with the high school. Did I leave any? You know so much more about CART.
Well, yeah, absolutely. CART is what inspired me to actually change. I'm a simple country farm boy from up north, and I went to the big university and studied philosophy and fell in love with classical models of education. And so even through this journey, when we started our vision group, one of our first vision groups, we actually were discussing getting involved at the middle school level with a classic liberal arts understanding of the world and a classic liberal arts curriculum. It wasn't until that CART was introduced to me that I started to change my mind, and it wasn't immediate either. I have some opinions that I can tell you after this forum on some of the outcomes and philosophies behind vocational-based learning and career-based learning, and I wasn't enthralled with the idea that we needed another tech school. However, when CART was introduced, there's a study that was done by the James Irvine Foundation over the results of CART over those 10 to 12 years, and you saw things like 99% average daily attendance, 95% graduation rates. You had 68% graduation of African American males from four-year universities. Oh, and by the way, this is in the worst part of town, literally on the worst side of the track. So when you start having numbers like that, they got my attention, but it wasn't until I went out to CART that I got to see what they meant by project-based learning, where, for example, I give the example all the time of the forensics project, where students would walk into a room, all the students, and there'd be a yellow-taped, roped-off area, and the local sheriff and coroner would be there, and they would say, for the next 6 weeks, you all are going to solve this crime. But in order to solve this, we're going to need to know biology, how cells live and die and function. We're going to need to know how those organisms work in an environment through ecology. We're going to study geometry with angles and vectors. We're going to talk about physics and acceleration and velocity. And then we're going to need to be able to present on these topics. So we're going to work on our presentation and writing skills, and we're going to need to report out. And then we're going to study Shakespeare so we can understand how death plays upon society. So really what you see in these projects is a liberal arts understanding of the world that brings in all facets and applies it through a specific context. So project-based learning in some ways is simply context-based learning, telling the student why they need to know it before you tell them what it is they need to know. And so that's what had me fall in love. And I think to one of your questions, Michael, just on some of the bullet points, Next High School is approved. It's a free public school. We are statewide. So we have an opportunity, and this I was talking with John just before this about how entrepreneurs may see the world just a little uniquely, but in education today, and I don't mean this as an overall critique, but if you want to say no to something in education, you make it a pilot program. And so what we decided early on was Next High School wasn't going to be just a pilot program. The concept has already been proven. It's on us as business leaders and community leaders to build the garden across the state and to plant seeds across the state for what a new education paradigm could look like. So I think that might be to some of the bullet points.
Thank you. You can feel the passion, right? This is what lit everybody up in the room. Not 2000, not what?
2010?
Yeah, amazing how much progress has been made.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons that I love Greenville and I love calling this place home is the folks in this town don't just settle for excellence. If you think about Main Street, the city leaders said this is good, as God said in the creation, but the West End's not looking that great. And let's dig in. And then we tore down the bridge and put it. It's astounding how much more was made as inertia from the first success went to the second success. So I think maybe we could transition somewhat and how this ties into the success of Next and the yeoman effort of the folks in the chamber to create something and then begin to measure around what Next was being touted as. How do you see the momentum of Next being the launching pad that is now being leveraged for the opportunity called Next High School?
Yeah, interesting way to position it. There are two things pop to mind. And just so you know what Next is working to grow more global headquarters. So think of DataStream that we used to have here, ScanSource, the old Hollingsworth company, et cetera, because it creates more jobs, higher paying jobs, and importantly, 10, 20 years down the road, it creates wealth in our community, like the Hollingsworth Foundation. So think of it as augmenting the recruiting strategy. I told Zach before the meeting to just speak honestly, and I'd clean up any messes that he made, being the quasi-political folks that Ben and I have to be. And I would just, one thing, what he was saying is that this is farming versus, instead of hunting, it's actually in addition to. That those two strategies, if we do a good job with helping Michael's company grow, Zach's companies grow, Anna's, your companies grow, it will help the hunters who are very supportive of what we're doing. Really where it came about is two things, and it all has to do with this buzzword, talent. But it's a buzzword because it's important. When we launched Next, we started asking these companies, what do you need to compete here versus Austin or Atlanta or Raleigh? It was around capital, finding venture capital money, et cetera. It was building a facility, now the Next Innovation Center. But the number one thing now, especially for the companies that are starting to really grow and almost start growing out of Next, is talent and finding the people they need. They've got the money, they've got the idea, they now have the customers around the world, and they're literally limited by the people they can find. So talent has now become really job one at Next, and that's a big shift for us. So it's not the only thing, but the first thing. And so anything having to do with improving the talent pipeline here, when we want to always start at home, and we have to also help them recruit externally when we can't find the talent we need here locally, but always starting at home. And this is a great example of something that was never on our work program. And I see Julie and Tim Reed's here and Ben from the chamber. We never said, hey, Next wants to start a charter school or a school or do anything like that in 5 years. It's more of an organic, kind of a lean startup thing that happens when you attract talent like Zach to a community, and then you plug him in. You don't just attract him here and then leave him to himself. You attract him here, he moves into the Next Center, he plugs into a group of entrepreneurs, he pitches crazy ideas, some get shot down, some get supported. And so, if you've heard of the Iron Yard, Peter Barth is a great parallel example. All that Iron Yard crazy stuff that's going on is because Peter Barth moved here from Indiana as well. We ought to recruit more people from Indiana. There's some brotherhood there. But anyway, and launched all that stuff because he got connected and plugged into a community. And now I use Peter to plug me into people because he's going so much, and it's pretty soon becoming that way with Zach. So it's all around talent for our companies and what do we need to do to make our local talent pool as entrepreneurial as possible, but also having our talent that's within Next saying, hey, I've got an idea, and letting the market see, the market within the school system in South Carolina, as well as the business community, will it get behind it? And you can feel the momentum that's getting behind this idea.
One of the concerns someone, let's say a cynic, might have is, well, you got a really great brand, if you get into a high school, it might be controversial. Have you had any resistance in that area, or are there any clarity around that topic at this point?
That's a great question. My background's in brand marketing, so this is something we've done before, licensing. So basically, the Greenville Chamber, as the owner of the Next brand, if you will, in partnership with the community, but the chamber owns it, is not running this school. But it was a licensing, just like the Next Innovation Center. Saw it as something that's very good for the economic development and health of this community. We worked out an arrangement to put that name on the building and an arrangement of how that would work with the folks that built it, Hughes Development. Same thing here, that it came up. There was a lot of deliberation and discussion. I wouldn't say any kind of controversy or even disagreement. It was more of how does this work? How could this name benefit the school? What would the drawbacks be even for the school? So it probably lasted about a good 9 months of just not debating and discussing, but to go from idea of maybe this should be called Next, and that came from Zach and the community. It wasn't us saying, hey, you ought to call this Next. And then just discussion between the chamber and what became the planning board at the time. So we're being entrepreneurial as a chamber, and some people around the country would say that's an oxymoron. But chambers have to be steady, and we are steady and very, very, very reliable, and we're going to be here for the next 125 years, but also being very entrepreneurial. And so I applaud not only the startup of Next, which I was talking with Jill Vales about, doesn't look like the chamber, and there's some marketing reasons for that. That's very entrepreneurial of the chamber, and so past leaders as well as Ben Haskew, allowing us to not only create Next, but now to extend that brand to a public school in Greenville is very entrepreneurial as well.
Thank you. So one of the things that, as a room full of business people all know, in business you get what you measure, and I'm thinking of the formation of Next, and then the realization that if we're going to do this, we need to get some resources behind it. If we're going to get resources behind it, it has to be accountability. Could you speak very quickly about maybe how Accelerate was formed? Because I want to transition into a conversation about the metrics of the Next high school, and then how we're going to enable more funding sources and more support in that regard. So could you speak to that? I know the Next started first in 2008, I believe. 2006, and then Accelerate was a couple years later. How did that play out?
Yeah, so Brenda Lotso, who many of you know that used to run small business programs with us at the chamber, works on Next. She was in Tripp's job in 2005 or so, 2006, and she and I went to Ben and said, hey, here's an idea of a need in this community, and we didn't call it Next, we didn't even know what it would be called, but we pitched this idea about, in addition to our traditional small business programming that we have here, we've got this small subset that we could really be competitive in. And we launched it out of the garage of the chamber. We really did. We took a little bit of Brenda's time and a little bit of my time and just started working with 8 CEOs, Michael being one of those folks, and just started helping them real small. We didn't do a big splash. And it grew all of a sudden. And so it kind of had to move somewhere to another level beyond just the chamber operating budget and all your membership dues. We wanted to find out, with the community, the larger companies that could see this as an economic development tool, fund it like they do other economic development entities and strategies. And so that's where we, over a year, kind of developed this thing called Accelerate, which is raising some additional money so that the burden isn't on the chamber's general operating budget to do this, but it's still a big part of. And so we raised some very targeted money. Many of you are your companies, and you individually are investors in Accelerate. But Accelerate was very much of a business model, just like your companies. You're accountable for results, and like staying up at night whether the paychecks will make it through the bank or not. Same thing with us, that we have to prove the results. And so we literally set out as per capita as kind of one overarching measure, but then what are ways with relatively little economic development money can we start moving that needle? And we saw high impact entrepreneurship as that means. So a group of investors came together. About 100 different companies and individuals today have invested in it. We're in our 5th of 5-year pledges, if you will, and we haven't lost one investor. We lost one investor out of 100, and that was due to business conditions in that investor. So we've proven the model because it's continuously, every quarter we report results of actual output, not just what we did with their money, and did it produce jobs. And the last thing I'll do to close this, the great example we just shared with our Accelerate investors 2 days ago was the job numbers. We survey all these companies every year for actual job numbers, not projections. We always joke if we ask them for projections, they say they'll be at 1 million employees in a couple of years, but actual numbers. And so every year we do that. Last year when we surveyed that time we had about 95, 96 companies. If you aggregate and put together all the full-time employees in the little Next companies around Greenville and the upstate, they'd be the 8th largest private employer in Greenville, ahead of a lot of the big names that you know and only behind the very biggest names. And so we report that back to our investors to say, here's what we're doing with your money, here's what it's producing in results. And I think you're right, it transitions perfectly to this being a very data-driven high school.
So there's a good friend of mine in the community has been an advisor to me for some time. You probably recognize from this phrase, he says often, reach exceeds grasp. So the aspiration of Next High School is certainly there, but when he set out goals and metrics, following on this obvious success with Next and hopefully continuing to grow, how do you define success over the next, let's just call it the next 2 or 3 years? What are the aspirational goals, and what are the metrics that you're going to use with the board's help and the other supporters of the staff and et cetera? How do we say we got there and we're across that first line, knowing that we'll keep going?
Yeah, I could take the answer to that question in a lot of different ways. Now we are planning on opening in fall 2015, and we are approved. The fun thing about Next High School at the end of the day, and this between now and as the school gets going, I've told several of you, it gets built by the people who show up. And so when we talk about metrics in the development year, we're largely talking about 3 different buckets, right? We're talking about ideas, we're talking about time, we're talking about capital. And when we look at the next community, I'll focus in on the next as a subset of the small business world. Most of the companies in Next are strapped for cash. The capital resources that they have to offer are going back into their own infrastructure and their own growth. So early on, we made it very clear to the small business community, hey, we need your ideas. We need what's between your ears. We need the time. We need you to put your hand to this and help us make this go. So when we talk about ideas, I'll give you an example. A few weeks ago, I don't know if Chris Manley's here from Ingenious. Chris gave me a call and he said, Zach, I got an idea for a project for you. I said, okay. He said, at ReWeGo, we have an issue with a lot of the houses that we're rehabilitating and folks that we're working with need wheelchair ramps. However, their use for the wheelchair ramp, there's a lot of turnover in the housing, there's a lot of issues. If we build these permanent wheelchair ramps like we've been doing, we can't do anything with them after the fact. And they called the Habitat for Humanity people and said, well, we just build permanent wheelchair ramps as well. He said, Zach, I want your students to help build a mobile, durable wheelchair ramp that I can take from site to site as it's installed, and then that's flexible and that has the same grades and the steep and the slope, as it were. And I need you all to do that. And that's a brilliant example of a project, because you take that project and you can have students exposed to how nonprofits work and operate and what their budgets are. You can talk about advanced materials and what stands up in durability beyond just the angle and engineering of something that can move around and collapse, right? And then we can have several of them get together and try to build better ones than each other. And it reminds me of a story, and I'll get to your metrics of success question, I promise. Early on in the Next high school process, there was a group of engineers from BMW that were eating downtown, and I was brought up and introduced to them, and they said, this is the young guy that's trying to start high school. And I kind of stick out my chest and I say, BMW, I'm going to work really hard to graduate young people, young men and women that can work on your floor and work to help build better cars. And the senior engineer from Germany says, no, don't do that. I said, well, why not? He goes, graduate 5 kids that think they can build a better car than BMW and give us a run for our money. The only way we stay on top is if people keep challenging us. And so when we step back and we said, what does it mean to be successful? What are the outcomes? And what are we trying to do when we talk about changing the Next high school paradigm? It came up in a lot of different ways. Traditional high school goals are graduation rates, SAT participation, high stakes test scores. We said, well, we certainly want to have those type of metrics and success. We think we can do that, and we've seen proven models that take this project-based learning and do that. But we also think that there are ways in which we can demonstrate to the South Carolina community new metrics of success, new ways to assess how do you know what's working. So we proposed, and we've been working with the state. So these are our actual goals, written in blood. Number of patents applied for by our students. There's a metric for that. There's a metric for number of South Carolina businesses started, number of internship hours, number of community service hours, and how much have students raised in their own scholarship funds by the time they graduate. So those are different metrics of success when it comes to high school, and what does it mean when the Next high school mission is to prepare young people for life after school, and what does it mean to prepare them for that life?
Thank you. So Anna, you and I talked a bit last night around what does an ideal student look like, and I was trained as a chemical engineer in the old way of just learn it, memorize it, someday you'll figure out what you're going to do with it. And, even in college it's that way, and I just think, all right, well, there's got to be the ideal person, young person that you'd like to see enter, or maybe there's not the ideal. Maybe it's we take all comers. But could you speak to those some of those topics?
Yeah, well, to what Zach said, we are a free public high school under a statewide charter district, so all students are welcome at Next High School. Two things for me: we're looking for a student that has an attitude for learning, a motivation for learning, coming in the door. And perhaps it means that coming out of middle school or even in an existing high school, they're just not demonstrating that attitude. And there are so many different reasons why an adolescent is not going to demonstrate that attitude. For me personally, I've been involved with the Center for Developmental Services here in Greenville for many years that deals with, that works with children with developmental delays and watching for milestones. And that certainly begins in the age 0 to 5. And in many cases continues from 5 to 18 to adulthood. And particularly on the autism spectrum, had some very engaging conversations with the administrators at CART in California about how children on that spectrum can thrive in this project-based learning environment. And I know we've got so many parents and so many schools in the Greenville County area with a child that's just not thriving. And so the student that we're looking for is the student that wants to thrive, that has a good support system, that I would probably go ahead and say the awareness of any child that is not thriving, in my personal opinion, can thrive in the Next High School environment. And at the same time, this is one alternative. This is one school that will start with several hundred, and once all 4 grades are up and running, are we saying about 1,300? And I will remind us that we have how many thousands of children in the Greenville County School District area. And I'm a product of South Carolina school system. And so there is nothing wrong with the school system. This is one opportunity that does start to have the conversation about a more direct connection between business and education. Because all of us, anyone that's a business owner, is looking for that workforce development, whether we think we're hiring tomorrow or not. All the awareness that we can have and the contribution towards that population of tomorrow, in my perspective, brings back value to us indirectly, well before it brings back value directly. So that's what I'm passionate about.
Yeah. No, as a business person, I'm looking forward to the emergence of this school and engaging, and we'll start talking about genomic medicine opportunities, put some of the kids in, have them run a PCR reaction. Those kinds of things will be fun. I have to go back to your comment about ideas, time, and capital. I mean, as a business person, every person in this room recognizes we need those 3 things to thrive. And I'm just struck by the parallel of Next coming up and then getting the community behind it. This is already happening, I think probably a little ahead of the curve, frankly, but now that we've seen it can be done. Can you speak to ways that this community of folks and the other folks in their companies can help? I mean, obviously, they can write a check, but in the area of perhaps in ideas and time, what can, if we want to help, what can we do, and what can our companies do?
Yeah, so one immediate way that we're actually asking the community for help is an industry partner summit that's coming up here on April 25th at CUICAR. So visit the Next High School website, nexthighschool.org. We're bringing in folks from CART to help us facilitate and walk through projects, but really it's an ideation session. It is asking you all in this room, if you had to do projects or if you went back to high school, what would you want to know? What are the things that you think are important, both from your industry? You know, I'm an engineer and I think it would be very helpful if students understood X. Or as a community member, I wish that somebody would have taught me how to go out and find a mortgage, or how to, you know, if I'm working with nonprofits, how do I decide which one to invest in? Or I wish somebody would have told me how something worked. Those type of project ideas is what we're asking for at this Industry Partner Summit, so we can take those ideas and then work at the mapping out, because we still are a South Carolina public school. We still have the standards that need to be met, and we report on them. So there is a metric and other things. We're just framing it up and giving context to exactly what those things are. So that's an immediate step. But then even as we move forward this year, I tell my board all the time, we're in that mode of facilities, faculty, and fundraising. We certainly could utilize all the help of the business community. I tell people the beautiful thing about Next High School is it just strikes me as the right time in history. It was the match struck at the right time that started a fire with a lot of our stakeholders. And I think even as that momentum continues, we're asking not only for your ideas, but are there ways in which that you're interested in getting involved and saying, hey, this is a skill set that I'll point at Patrick here in the room with HTI. They said, hey, we'll help you with some of your executive search, or with Mindy over here saying, hey, we'll help figure out what that executive should look like. Mindy's with Smart Work Network. And those are examples of folks that have stepped up and said, this is what we can do. With no expectation of return, we can help with Next High School because this is something that we do best. And I think that's a great show of time and involvement to bring this thing to the right time in history. So it's a crowdsource, it's a crowd movement effort. And so I think that certainly is what we need. But at the end of the day, Next High School also has to have resources. We'd have to be able to do things well with our infrastructure and other pieces. We certainly are a discount to the taxpayer, right? We're talking about overall a $10 million raise for the facilities, furniture, fixture, which places us, if you look at another school that's being built right now, that's about 1/4 the cost of a similar type school. And then we're also running on about 80% of the operation capital that a traditional public school student would receive. And we're looking at paying our instructors about 25 to 30% more on our current budgets. So in order to do that, we think we're a tremendous value and investment for the community, and we'd love to have those conversations with you as the capital needs continue to work themselves out.
Okay, thank you.
Michael, could I just say something on that?
Please.
Just real quickly, there's a term we've been using at the Chamber for a few years called catalytic projects. And all we're doing is saying sometimes the community really has to pull everybody into the tent and say, across all these entities and geographies and things, and say, how do we address a threat, whether it's an EPA air quality issue that may slow down all economic development, or an opportunity. And things, in the past were obviously Main Street kind of redevelopment, or a Peace Center, or certainly Falls Park. None of us, saw how transformational those kinds of things could be. And to Zach's point about being involved, this is one of those catalytic projects where Greenville doesn't do it small, and the upstate and South Carolina does it big. And I wasn't involved in Falls Park. I'd love to be able to say I was, a part of that. I wasn't. I go there all the time. I was there yesterday. I wasn't involved with Main Street. I wasn't involved with the Peace Center, et cetera. This is one of those things where you can actually get involved, and 5-10 years from now, and it's a lot of hard work. It's going to take money, et cetera. But it's one of those opportunities to make a difference and also know that you were part of something big. We're all part of a lot of small things. We have to do that stuff, but we rarely get those opportunities in life to really contribute in a big way. And if education in this kind of a model piques your interest, it's a great opportunity to plug into something that's big. And then the last thing I just want to say real quickly is around the support of the school system and other things, the Greenville County system, that don't misconstrue that Next High School is Next sole and focus, or the Greenville Chamber by any means. Efforts in there. Just within Next, we had 200 middle school students from a disadvantaged school in the Next Innovation Center 2 weeks ago. And of course, everybody was worried about how that would go. It went great. So that's an outreach program called Dream Connectors, and 2 of our CEOs plugged in through the chamber into that program and start to host a lot of our students there. We also had all the guidance counselors from across Greenville County school system had their all-site retreat last year there, and Peter Barth and I talked to them about Next for 2.5 hours. They did Q&A with us so they could better inform their students. So this is in addition to a continued movement through the chamber and Next to plug into our existing school system and even those in neighboring counties. This is just kind of the cherry on top of the sundae in that effort.
So workforce development is not a new topic. The Chambers had a lot of people working on the concept as a catalytic effort as part of that core transition in the community. I am kind of curious, do you see the folks that have typically been behind the workforce development, are they rallying to the cause, or do we still need to connect these 2 groups, or is it pretty well aligned already?
I'll throw it to Zach mainly, but we haven't seen any pushback. We've seen a lot of learning about it. We've seen support from the school district. And I'm the son of a 35-year school teacher in Greenville County Public Schools, and big product of that. And the school district has embraced it they see it, what it can do for the area, and that's in addition to, it's not in competition with. So I think that's been very positive, Zach. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think Next High School, again, coming from a group of a bunch of folks that don't know they can't, when we look at what does it mean to prepare young people for a yet unknown future in a yet unknown world, I think we start to, it depends on what kind of data and metrics you start pulling in, but I think one convincing narrative is that think about Next High School students. If they come in 2015, their first access to the job market's in 2019. If they go through a 4-year institution, that's 2023. So even then, if they kind of bounce around and they keep with current trends where they go through about 12 different jobs in their lives, what does that mean in 2025? And so Next High School has this aim to say, how do we prepare young people for that yet unknown world where depending on which futurist you decide to read, 40% of those jobs do not exist today at the high level. So what does it mean to prepare those young people? And I think you'll see two things in Next High School. The first is cultural, that there are things that when you're building a school need to go into the curriculum. Right? Those are the pieces of knowledge and the blocking and tackling. But then there's a cultural aspect. How do you create a culture of entrepreneurism? How do you create a culture of young people who also don't know they can't? How do you do this so that when they graduate, the best person that will ever teach them the rest of their life is the person in the mirror? How do you prepare them for that? But then secondly, on a different level, on a strategic bet, if the world continues to have ubiquitous access to knowledge, that everybody is 30 seconds in a Google search away from being an expert at anything, what does that mean? Who wins in the next economy? And as we looked at it, we said we think it's shifting from a knowledge world, one that's based on data and knowledge points, to one of wisdom and application. So the people that will win in the future through the Next High School's perspective are those that can apply knowledge faster, better, cheaper, and take that market advantage. So when we start talking about that talent development, those are the type of issues we're wrestling with when it comes to workforce development and what does it mean to graduate kids who can build a better car.
Outstanding. We're getting ready to transition to questions from the room. I think maybe we'll just close this section with really a discussion around the connections, not just to the companies in the room, but I'm thinking of Greenville Tech and Clemson and USC and other. Anna, maybe you could speak to, first maybe acknowledge the other members of your board, because all you I've been watching the hours. I've been putting in a lot of time. If you could acknowledge them, but also could you speak to, is there a dialogue, is there an engagement, and how might that play out, as the school comes online?
Do you want to pull up the slide, or do you? Definitely, there's a much larger planning committee than the three of us on stage today, including Jason Primo of ADEX. I lost the second word in his company name. It'll come up on screen in a minute. Yes, ADEX Manufacturing. Jason serves on the board of the Greenville Tech Foundation and is very, very involved in the conversations around advanced manufacturing and workforce development in that area. Zach, we've already introduced you to. Peter Waldschmidt, vice chair of our committee and CEO of his own company, NOSO, and was also featured, I think, in the news recently of a new startup in technology. Toby Stansell of Acumen IT. Brenda Timms is involved in the Greenville Health System and MedX Academy and everything that they're doing on the medical side of things, in which the nurses and the physicians are in classes together or in the environment learning together. So actually what she's doing with academic affairs at the Greenville Health System has been very parallel to what we're doing with Next High School. Lisa Stevens helped found Langston Charter Middle School. We were very excited when she chose to join, and I will say she kind of checked us out in the first meeting. She was very clear, I'm not going to sign up until I understand what you're doing, and so we're excited that she signed on. And then David Gant, a trained attorney and legal counsel at Legacy Charter High School, and very involved teacher and I believe coach, very involved with the students. We've been meeting at least once a month, if not more, for about a year and a half. Concept started in 2010. It's 2014 now. This planning committee's been together for a while. We value the fact that we represent different voices. I run my own company. I talk about financial statements and how they tell the story of your business. And it's been really neat to see how we're talking about how this education can tell the story of business to adolescents or children, and they can start writing their own stories. I love what Zach says about the teacher in the mirror. And that ability to make critical decisions, and how can we teach that and practice that earlier and earlier, because quite frankly, I don't think that I had all of that when I was interviewing for jobs. I kind of knew where I wanted to live. I couldn't have told you exactly what I wanted to do, let alone I couldn't have told you that I'd own a company today. And how do we start those conversations earlier? And I'll put in, that entrepreneurial spirit. We talk about innovation and being innovative in all ways. It's my definition that innovation doesn't require business ownership. So that entrepreneurial spirit translates into employment as well as into ownership. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, so at this point, we're going to transition to questions. I just want to make sure we reinforce the point that was made earlier. If you have a question, direct it to one of the intelligent folks at the table.
I'm here to balance out the
IQ.
and weight up here.
So please raise your hand. First question. Yes, sir.
So, Ann, I'll listen to you since you have a child at AJ Wittenberg. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I do not have any children. So you might be confusing me with the sponsor of today that spoke. Okay.
I'm very delighted to know more about Next because I've seen it and heard about it, but I don't know, and this is triple my understanding of it. So to your point, John, I think keeping people informed and more informed is great because it's very exciting. But I want to understand a little bit more though, because I had thought that Next was somehow the segue from AJ to Dennis and Fisher to the high school component. For them being science, technology, education, and math, and entrepreneur and innovation is everything in addition to that. It's writing, it's thinking, it's philosophy, et cetera. So is Next actually a STEM school, or is it just connected them through project-based learning and data-based, results?
Great question.
You want me to give the layman's term, and then you'll give more of
you can give
in layman's terms, yes, we're a STEM school. We're a STEAM school as well. I mean, I think we want to incorporate all of the science, technology, the arts, the engineering, the mathematics through the application of the projects. So we want our projects to be that in-depth. As to a specific feeding between elementary to middle to high, we don't have a prescribed pathway. And so we want to think that we would be bringing in students from all of the middle schools in the area, charter or non-charter. And we would be an alternative that incorporates all of those ideas without putting a title on it. Zach's talking with the charter school district more often than I am, so I'll let him correct me.
No, I think from the very beginning, at our very first vision group, there was a gentleman from AJ Wittenberg there who helped us understand even just the landscape and how can we best complement the ecosystem as a group of CEOs. And so that's where we ended up with the high school. Now, when it comes to STEM and STEAM and the various components of how you decide to divide and prioritize your curriculum and what have you, I think Next High School certainly, to Anna's point, has science, technology, engineering, math. Right now, in the current skills gap, the jobs that are going unfulfilled here in the upstate and around South Carolina, I think, depending on how you cut it, 52% is the conservative number of those jobs are in STEM-related fields. So the trend only looks to continue that to prepare young people for life after school means that they have to have a robust understanding of the science, technology, engineering, and math. The issue arises when with STEM and other efforts, on the I'll call it the condition of the 4th, 5th, 6th grader today. So if you walk into a room, I think a lot of you would be shocked. I'm engaged to a 6th grade middle school teacher, and I walked into the room and I said, how many of you are on social media? No one knew what that meant. I said, well, how many of you are on Facebook? 0. What do you guys use to communicate? Oh, Instagram, Snapchat. What do you think of Facebook? Oh, that's what my parents are on. That has nothing to do with me. And then there's this other, so there are these cultural gaps that just by simply exposing and engaging students into STEM doesn't necessarily mean that they're looking for a marketplace of employment within STEM. So there's a lot of the culture and the narrative that we use to surround, and I can give examples of that, but I would say, we're talking that Next High School is STEM, but a lot more. There's a lot more cogs in the wheel on how we're trying to turn this thing. So.
And Zach, wouldn't you say it's how STEM is learned?
Yes.
Is a big.
Yes.
I mean, that's one of the big differentiators. Is how it's learned through the hands-on, almost the Mikey. He doesn't know it's healthy life cereal commercial. Embedding the STEM into the crime scenes and things.
Next question. Yes, ma'am.
What is STEM?
Science, technology, engineering, and math.
So is this high school going to be a vocational high school?
And that's the fun part about carving out a nuanced way we talk about the future, and that is it certainly has vocational aspects. So there are 4 schools within the school. There's a school mobility. This is at the junior and senior level. School mobility, which is automotive and aerospace. School of energy, which also includes advanced materials. School of life sciences, and School of technology. So students, as they go through their educational sojourn, will be exposed to exactly what the life after school looks like with market-driven schools within the school and learning communities. But at the end of the day, a student should be prepared to go down whatever pathway they want to go pursue, and that includes pursuits of visual and aesthetic arts. That includes pursuits of history, or whether they want to enter the workforce immediately or what have you. So that's part of, absolutely, STEM is critical, and that's a critical component of how we decide the world will look in the future. But at the moment, we're wrestling with the way in which we surround and understand STEM, especially to I encourage you all to get to know 6th graders today, and then to see the challenge that you might have to prepare them for the world. So,
Next question. Don't be shy. You can do it. Yes, ma'am.
I actually don't have a question, more of a comment. Please correct me if I'm wrong. To kind of piggyback on what Nate was saying, it seems to me that the Next High School is going to take our students, whether they came up through the traditional educational model or through STEM, AJ, you're going through this sort of technology, and just taking what they've learned and kind of put a big bow on it to prepare them to like you said, to go out to an interview, because you're not prepared to do that, or to prepare them to go to college, or prepare them to contribute to the community, to contribute to their life, and to simply solve problems. Because I think one of the biggest things, the biggest problem we have with a lot of the children today is that they go out into the world and a problem hits them and they have no idea what to do with it. So that's what excites me about hearing this concept.
Thank you. Any other question? Yes, please. based on what I know of these folks, I think they're in violent agreement with you. So I think I'm getting the signal. We might have time for one more question. Yes, ma'am.
I think this was referred to earlier, but the connections with higher education. Have there been those kind of contacts or discussions? Because I think higher ed, as a former professor, I think higher ed sometimes gets left out of the loop, and they certainly need to be critically involved.
Great question.
Can I talk about our curriculum committee? We actually have Dory Helms, formerly of Clemson University, involved on our curriculum development team. And when we were interacting at CART, I will go ahead and address that. I mean, yes, it is the intention for a graduate of Next High School to go on to a 4-year degree higher education program, and or a 2-year degree, and or anything else. And so, no intentional limitation or pathway being drawn other than the pathway that the child would choose. And so, yes, we're talking with several different representatives of higher ed. And I'm so energized statewide at the conversations that we are having, interacting with higher ed, with the 2-year programs, with Greenville Tech, with what we traditionally referred to as a vocational school, and kind of redefining that word vocation. And allowing it to blend in the way that business actually blends it. And just to one point of the day-to-day and watching the vibrancy of the students, if they come back late from break, they get less time on the 3D printer rather than detention. And that was enough of a competitive force that in one of the classrooms that we were visiting, I mean, the kids would nod and agree, I'm not going to miss my time. And how do we recreate that? How do we keep that enthusiasm?
And before Steve pulls the plug on us, I wanted to set Zach up with a home run softball, but it's around an event that's coming up to kind of show the relationship being built with Clemson and some of the others. The next big meeting, the industry summit that's coming up, is actually at CU ICAR. And so trying to show that connectivity. But it's just a beginning, and having folks like the former provost at a major research university on the curriculum committee, we're getting there. Yep.
Aren't we blessed that we have people in Greenville that are a whole lot smarter than me? I thank the Lord for that every day. Zach, Anna, John, Michael, thank you so much for your time this morning. Great panel discussion. Being as deeply involved in the chambers I've been for the past 15 years, I am continuously amazed at how deep into this business community the chamber goes. It is absolutely amazing. So I'm just thankful to be a part of this organization today. We have a gift for our panelist and our moderator. It is the Reimagining Greenville book by John Boyanowski with Knox White. And we'd like to present one of these to each of our panelists this morning for giving us our time. Now, these books are personalized by John Boyanowski, and I am not responsible for what he wrote, these books. So it's good to have you. One more round of applause for our panelists this morning. I did say that there was only one prize being given out this morning. That was a set of keys. I was wrong. Now we have a set of eyeglasses. If these are yours, they'll be right here on the podium, and you can retrieve them in anonymity after the program is over. Thank you very much. I know we probably have some non-members here in the room today. I know it's hard to believe that you would have a business in Greenville and not be a member. But I think we probably do have some here in the room today. Brittany is in the back corner back there in membership. I'd love for you to see her and have a conversation with her about joining this organization, because it's so important to the community and to the organization, and it can make a tremendous difference in your business as well. What a great morning. We've had a great deal of information. It's fascinating to know how intertwined education is with economic development in our community, and you guys did a great job of explaining that to us. I thank you all for being part of the Chamber of Commerce, not the building the chamber, not the next building the chamber, not the committees and the organizations, but the chamber as a whole. That's me and that's you, and we're all part of building one of the premier business communities in the world, and we'll continue to do so. Have a great Friday. We are adjourned.